My best friend called me a hobbyist over brunch. Weeks later, her wedding photos vanished forever. Hi, I'm Caleb Rowe, 35, and the moment my best friend called me a hobbyist over Eggs Benedict, I realized our friendship had been quietly rotting for years. I appreciate the offer, Lauren Pierce said, smiling in that tight, polite way people do right before they insult you. But I need a real professional for my wedding, not someone who just enjoys photography on the side. She said it loudly, loud enough for the waitress, loud enough for the two couples at the neighboring tables. Then she added, no offense, which is what people say when they absolutely intend offense. I stared at her across the marble cafe table, trying to reconcile that sentence with the last 12 years of friendship and the 18 years I'd spent building a photography career she had apparently never bothered to notice. Lauren scrolled through her phone and shoved it toward me. This is who I hired, she said. Evan Holt. He's amazing. Like legit. I looked at the portfolio. Clean lighting. Safe poses. Every bride frozen in the same tilted head, soft smile configuration like a wedding catalog printed by a robot. It was fine. Not bad. Not memorable. Definitely not better than my work. But I didn't argue. I just nodded. Because arguing would have required her to actually see me, and history suggested that wasn't going to happen. Lauren and I met freshman year of college. Same dorm floor. Same terrible breakup semester. We'd been inseparable through graduations, moves, bad jobs, worse boyfriends. We used to joke that we'd be old menaces together, haunting brunch spots and judging strangers. Somewhere along the way, I became background Caleb, the guy with a camera at parties. The one who worked at that arts nonprofit, as she liked to explain to people. What she never explained was that I ran its entire visual department, or that my documentary photography had been featured in national publications, or that I made more from my side thing than she did from her corporate marketing job. To Lauren, I was still the college roommate who took photos for fun. The wedding invitation arrived a month later with a handwritten note. So excited for you to attend as a guest this time. No working, just celebrating. The word guest was underlined. I almost declined, but I went anyway. And that decision, bringing my camera out of habit, not intention, would quietly detonate her entire wedding story 3 weeks later. The wedding itself was flawless in the way expensive weddings always are. Beautiful, sterile, and aggressively curated. 200 guests. A restored lakeside estate. White roses everywhere, like the florist had a personal vendetta against color. Lauren floated through it all in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car, smiling for cameras that weren't mine. Evan Holt, the real professional, arrived with 2 assistants, 3 camera bodies, and the confidence of a man who had watched exactly one YouTube video titled How to Control a Wedding Crowd. He barked instructions like he was directing traffic after a pileup. Chins up. No, not like that. Bride's family only. Move, move. Guests obeyed because that's what you do when someone has a camera and authority issues. I watched from the sidelines, hands in my pockets, reminding myself I was just a guest. Not working, just celebrating. I told myself I wouldn't shoot a single frame. That lasted about 40 minutes. Documentary photographers don't stop seeing moments just because they're off the clock. My fingers itched when the flower girl fell asleep halfway down the aisle and got scooped up by her grandmother without anyone noticing. When Lauren's dad lost his voice during his speech and laughed it off with tears in his eyes. When Lauren and her husband exchanged a glance during dinner that said, oh, this is real now. So I took out my camera. Not for Lauren. Not for the album. For myself. Muscle memory. Instinct. I stayed invisible. No flash. No direction. I shot from the edges. Quiet, human moments Evan didn't have time for because he was busy rearranging bodies into symmetrical happiness. By the end of the night, I had about 350 photos. Nothing staged. Nothing repeatable. Just truth. Lauren hugged me goodbye, wine-happy and glowing. So nice to just have you there, she said. No pressure. I smiled and meant it. 3 weeks later, at 6:12 a.m., my phone started vibrating like it was trying to escape the nightstand. One missed call. Then another. Then a voicemail. Caleb, please call me. Something's wrong. By noon, there were 9 messages. By evening, her voice wasn't polite anymore. It was breaking. The voicemail that finally explained everything came in at 7:03 a.m., raw and breathless. Caleb. Evan lost the photos. All of them. His hard drive crashed. He didn't back anything up. He says they're gone. Gone. 3,000 images. The ceremony. The vows. The first dance. Every stage smile Evan had so confidently demanded. I don't know what to do, she sobbed. Please call me. Please. I listened once. Then again. Then I made coffee. The messages escalated fast. I remember you had your camera. I saw you taking pictures. You have something, right? My mom is hysterical. His parents keep asking. You're my best friend. That last one landed heavier than the others. Because best friends don't dismiss 18-year careers over brunch. Best friends don't decide who you are without bothering to look. I didn't answer. That afternoon, while I was reviewing the photos I'd taken, quietly stunned by how alive they felt, I got an email from someone I didn't expect. Marianne Cole, senior editor at Vow and Frame, a national wedding magazine. She'd seen my documentary work before. Apparently, she'd also seen the internet lighting Evan Holt on fire after he went public first, blaming unexpected equipment failure. Someone in the comments mentioned a professional photographer friend who'd been called a hobbyist and sidelined. The internet did the rest. We're doing a feature, Marianne wrote. Wedding disasters. What goes wrong when experience is mistaken for price? Would you be willing to contribute your images? They offered standard publication rates, plus exclusivity, plus a bonus that made me sit back in my chair and laugh once out loud. While Lauren's calls kept coming, my photos, my hobby, were about to become the only visual record of her wedding day. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. Send the contract. I replied. The article went live on a Thursday morning. By lunch, it was everywhere. Vow and Frame titled it with surgical precision. The most expensive bridezilla mistake of the year. It wasn't cruel. It was factual, almost educational. They broke down exactly what went wrong. How Evan's lack of redundant backups violated basic professional standards. How price doesn't equal preparedness. How dismissing experience in favor of optics can cost you everything. And then there were my photos. The flower girl asleep in her grandmother's arms. Lauren's father wiping his eyes with his tie. The split second when Lauren and her husband forgot the room and just held on to each other. Real. Unstaged. Alive. Within 24 hours, the magazine's post hit 1.9 million views. Photographers flooded the comments. Brides shared it. Event planners bookmarked it like a cautionary tale. Lauren called me screaming. You sold my wedding photos? I licensed my photographs, I said calmly. You didn't even ask me. You declined my services. That doesn't give you the right. It does, actually. She accused me of betrayal, of profiting off her pain, of humiliating her publicly. I listened. Then I said something I'd never said out loud before. You decided I wasn't a professional without ever looking at my work. You chose price over skill. And when that choice collapsed, you expected me to save you. Silence. Then, smaller. I was desperate. Yes, I said. And I was dismissed. That conversation ended our friendship more cleanly than brunch ever could. The irony was brutal. The only wedding photos Lauren would ever have were taken by the person she refused to trust. The fallout didn't stop with Lauren. For weeks, my inbox looked like it had been kicked open by the internet. Photographers thanking me. Brides apologizing to me on behalf of people they'd never met. Event planners quietly asking for my rates before you get booked out forever. I got more inquiries in 1 month than I had in the previous 2 years combined. The irony wasn't lost on me. The photos I'd taken not working, the ones shot quietly from the margins, became the most powerful proof of my professionalism. People didn't want perfection anymore. They wanted truth. Lauren, meanwhile, was not having a good time. Her social media comments turned into a blood sport. Strangers dissected her brunch quote like it was a court transcript. Hobbyist became a meme. Someone made a TikTok reenactment that somehow involved a ukulele. She texted once more. You could have just given me the photos. I typed back, deleted it, retyped. You could have respected me. That was the last exchange we had for a long time. The photos went up in my studio after the article ran. Not as trophies. Not as revenge. As examples of what happens when you let moments breathe instead of forcing them to perform. Sometimes clients asked if the story was true. I always said yes. And then I asked them one question. Do you want your wedding to look perfect or feel real? Most of them knew the answer. 6 months passed. Long enough for the internet to move on. Long enough for Lauren's wedding to become old outrage instead of fresh spectacle. long enough for the silence between us to feel permanent. Then, one night at 11:48 p.m., a message came through. It was from Lauren. No emojis. No defensiveness. Just words. I've been thinking about everything that happened. Not just the photos. How I treated you. I never updated the picture I had of you in my head. I kept you frozen as my college roommate with a camera, even when your life outgrew that version. That's on me. I read it twice. Then a third time. She didn't ask for the photos. Didn't ask for forgiveness. She acknowledged something I'd waited over a decade to hear, that she hadn't seen me, even when the evidence was right in front of her. I understand if you don't want to respond, she wrote. I just needed to say I was wrong. I didn't reply right away. Some bridges burn fast. Others smolder quietly until you realize there's nothing left to cross. My career didn't need closure. My pride didn't either. But the message sat there, unanswered, like a door left unlocked. Not an invitation, just a possibility. For the first time, the choice was mine. I never responded to Lauren's message. Not out of spite. Not to punish her. I just didn't feel the urgency I used to. The version of me who needed her recognition had quietly retired. What surprised me most was how light that felt. The story followed me, though. People brought it up at consultations, half whispering, like it was gossip and folklore at the same time. You're that photographer, right? I was. But not because of the article. Because I'd finally stopped shrinking to fit someone else's outdated idea of me. The experience changed how I worked. I stopped underpricing myself. Stopped over-explaining my credentials. If someone called me a hobbyist now, I didn't argue. I declined. Funny thing, the right clients never used that word. The photos from Lauren's wedding stayed framed in my studio. Not labeled with her name. Just moments. A sleeping child. A shaking hand. A look that said this matters. They weren't hers anymore. They were proof. I never replied to Lauren. Not because I wanted the last word, but because I finally understood something that took me years to learn. Not every apology is an invitation, and not every realization earns access back into your life. The version of me who would have answered, who would have softened it, reassured her, minimized himself to preserve history. That guy didn't exist anymore. He burned out quietly somewhere between being called a hobbyist and being expected to fix a disaster I didn't create. What stayed with me wasn't anger. It was clarity. Lauren didn't lose her wedding photos because of bad luck. She lost them because she valued appearances over substance, price over preparation, and familiarity over respect. The hard drive crash was just the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she'd been writing for years. My career took off after that, but that wasn't the real win. The real win was never again needing someone's permission to be taken seriously. The photos from her wedding still hang in my studio, not as revenge, not as trophies, but as proof of what happens when you trust instinct over ego, depth over packaging, and people who show you who they are instead of who you assume they are. Lauren's wedding exists only in those frames now. The stage perfection she paid for is gone forever. What remains is the truth, quiet, human, imperfect, and real, captured by the person she dismissed. About a year after the article, I ran into someone from Lauren's wedding. Her cousin, actually. We crossed paths at a gallery opening. She froze when she recognized me, then laughed awkwardly. You probably hate our family, she said. I didn't. But what she told me stuck. Lauren had stopped showing people wedding photos altogether. Not because they didn't exist, but because explaining why they existed the way they did was too exhausting. Every explanation reopened the wound. Every question reminded her that the narrative wasn't under her control anymore. For someone who curated everything, that loss hurt more than the missing images ever could. Meanwhile, my work changed. I stopped chasing weddings that wanted perfection and started attracting couples who wanted honesty. Fewer bookings, higher pay, better energy, no barking orders, no forced smiles. One groom told me, "We hired you because your photos look like people forgot you were there." That was the highest compliment I'd ever received. The irony? That's exactly how I'd photographed Lauren's wedding. Unseen, unwanted, unimportant. Until I wasn't. Every once in a while, someone would ask if I ever planned to give Lauren the photos privately. I always gave the same answer. If she'd respected my work before the disaster, she would have had them. People expect generosity to fill the gaps where accountability should live. They confuse kindness with obligation. I stopped doing that too. The photographer she hired quietly shut down his business. Not publicly, just slowly. Fewer posts, fewer bookings, Then nothing. Equipment fails. That happens. But professionals prepare for failure. That's the difference between confidence and competence. Lauren learned that too late. I don't think Lauren is a villain. I think she's someone who mistook familiarity for knowledge, price for skill, and honesty for cruelty when it bruised her ego. I don't wish her harm. I don't celebrate her loss. But I don't carry it for her either. The story people remember isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. About what happens when you finally stop shrinking so others can stay comfortable. She lost her wedding album. I gained something quieter and far more permanent. Self-respect. Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges. 2 years after the article, the story stopped being that wedding disaster and turned into that lesson people reference. It followed me into rooms before I entered them. People didn't ask if I was professional anymore. They asked how I saw things. That shift mattered. It meant I was no longer defending my worth. I was being evaluated on my vision. I started mentoring younger photographers. The first question they always asked was technical: gear, settings, lenses. The second was always emotional. How do you deal with clients who don't respect you? I told them the truth. You don't convince them. You outgrow them. Lauren had been a rehearsal for that lesson. A painful one, but effective. Once, late at night, I opened the folder with her wedding photos again. Not for nostalgia, for distance. I noticed details I'd missed before, the tension in Lauren's shoulders during posed shots. How she relaxed only when no one was directing her. How the real joy happened between instructions, not during them. Even then, she'd been performing. Some people confuse control with happiness. Another message came from Lauren. Years later this time. Short. Neutral. I heard you're doing incredible work. I'm glad. No apology. No request. No reopening. Just acknowledgement. I appreciated that more than the original apology. By then, my career had settled into something sustainable. Not viral. Not chaotic. Solid. I worked fewer weddings, but each one felt aligned. Clients trusted me enough to disappear into their own moments. I delivered galleries that made people cry, not because they were perfect, but because they were true. That was always the goal. I realized something uncomfortable about myself. For years, I'd allowed people like Lauren to define me because it was easier than redefining myself in their absence. Familiarity felt safer than solitude. Losing her forced me to stand alone with my work. And it held. Occasionally, someone still joked about the article. The hobbyist who won. I corrected them once. I didn't win, I said. I stopped losing. Winning implies competition. This had never been about beating Lauren or Evan or anyone else. It was about opting out. I no longer carry my camera everywhere. Not because I stopped seeing moments, but because I learned when they're mine to keep and when they're mine to sell. That distinction changed everything. Boundaries do that. The photos from that wedding are still on my studio wall. Clients sometimes ask if I'll ever take them down. I won't. They remind me of the cost of being underestimated and the danger of staying small to preserve relationships that rely on you staying that way. People love stories like this because they think it's about revenge. It isn't. It's about recognition, especially the moment you stop begging for it. Lauren lost control of her narrative the day she decided who I was without asking. I regained mine the day I let her live with that decision. Some friendships end loudly. Some fade. Some teach you exactly what you needed to learn before they go. Her wedding was one day. That lesson stayed.